May 1999, somewhere above 18,000 feet, in air so thin that engines gasp and gravity itself seems to fight you harder. A fighter jet is about to go into combat for the first time in the history of aviation. No air force on earth had fought a war at this altitude before. How do you fight an enemy dug into positions higher than most mountains on the planet, positions you can barely see? In weather that changes by the hour, using jets never designed for this kind of fight. What happens when the very first missions end not in victory but in loss? A pilot captured, another shot down trying to save him, a helicopter crew gone in seconds. And how does a nation come back from that, rewrite its own playbook mid-war and still win? This is the story of Operation Safed Sagar. The Indian forces fight in the skies over Kargil, a war fought under rules no air force had ever tested. A war where the enemy was in plain sight but crossing an invisible line to reach them was forbidden. Here's how it happened. In the winter of 1998 into the early 1999, while the passes of Kargil lay buried under snow and largely unwashed, soldiers from Pakistan's northern light infantry along with armed irregulars moved onto the Indian side of the line of control. They took position on the high ground above Dras, Kaksar, Bitalik and Turtuk, ridge lines and peaks that overlooked the Srinagar-Leh highway, the only road linked to Ladakh. By early May, Indian troops discovered they were not dealing with a handful of infiltrators. This was a deliberate, entrenched occupation and it now threatened one of the most strategically vital roads in the country. The army launched Operation Vijay to take the heights back, but this war, mountain warfare at an altitude where climbing a few hundred meters could take hours, where every ridge was a fortress and where the defenders had the highest ground in the fight. The army needed help from above, and that decision to bring the Air Force into a live war for the first time since 1971 was not a simple one. Because the government placed one hard condition on the Indian Air Force: strike the intruders on Indian territory, but do not cross the line of control. No hitting supply bases in Pakistan, no hot pursuit across the border. Fight the enemy only on the ground they had already stolen. It meant fighting a war with one hand deliberately tied, a constraint almost no air force in modern history had operated under. And it set the stage for what came next. At first light of the 26th of May, Indian jets went into action. MiG-21s, MiG-23s and MiG-27s struck intruder camps, supply routes and gun positions around Dras, Kargil and Bitalik. It was the opening of Operation Safed Sagar and the beginning of the highest air campaign ever flown in combat. The next day brought the war's harshest lesson. Flight Lieutenant K. Nachiketa was flying a reconnaissance strike over Bitalik when the MiG-27 lost engine power at altitude and went down. He ejected and was captured by Pakistani forces. Later, parade on the television, a moment that would draw international attention to how prisoners were being treated. Squadron leader Ajay Ahuja, flying alongside in a MiG-21, circled back to try to locate his downed colleague. He knew shoulder-fired missiles were active in the area. He stayed anyway. Minutes later, his aircraft was hit by a Pakistani Stinger missile. Ahuja did not survive. When his body was returned, it showed injuries that suggested he had been killed at close range after landing, a detail that would later be raised as a violation of the Geneva Conventions. The following day, a Mi-17 helicopter operating near Tololing was struck by 3 missiles in quick succession. All 4 crew members were killed. 3 aircrafts, multiple lives in under 48 hours. For an Air Force just days into the fight, it was a brutal wake-up call. Proof that low-altitude strikes were flying straight into the range of the enemy's shoulder-fired missiles. Something had to change, and it had to change fast. The losses forced an immediate reassessment. Flying low to hit targets precisely was getting pilots killed. So the Air Force made a decision that would define the rest of the campaign: get above the missile threat and hit just as hard from there. That meant bringing in the Mirage 2000 and pairing it with a weapon India had never used in actual combat before: laser-guided bombs. Ground and air crews worked at wartime speed to fit lesser designator pods and integrate targeting systems that, in peacetime, would have taken months to certify it worked. From medium altitude safely above the Stinger's reach, Mirage jets could now put a bomb precisely onto a bunker or a supply dump, something older aircraft dropping unguided bombs simply could not match in that terrain. On the 17th of June, Mirages struck the enemy's main logistics base in Munto Dalo in the Batalik sector, destroying stockpiles that were feeding fighters on the ridge lines above. Without resupply, those positions started to weaken. Through the following weeks, the campaign kept building. Repeated strikes on Toluling and Point 5140, both laser-guided and conventional, chipping away at fortified positions that ground troops had been unable to dislodge on their own. It was innovation forced by the loss, proof that the campaign early failures did not end the mission, they rewrote it. By early June, the Air Force had already flown over 1,000 strike sorties. The tempo did not slow down. On the 24th of June, Mirage 2000 struck Tiger Hill itself, one of the most heavily defended and strategically vital peaks in the entire sector. Using the same laser-guided precision that had proven itself at Munto Dalo, the strike softened the position enough for ground troops to finally take it. Through July, the combined pressure of airstrikes and infantry assaults broke the occupation. Toluling fell, Tiger Hill fell. One by one, the heights that had been seized months earlier were retaken. On the 26th of July 1999, India declared Operation Vijay complete. The intruders had been pushed back across the line of control. Operation Safed Sagar never crossed that line. It fought entirely within the limits it had been given. At altitudes no Air Force had tested in combat, against an enemy dug into some of the most difficult terrain on earth, and through early losses severe enough to force a complete change in tactics mid-campaign. By most estimates, the air campaign shortened the war by weeks, saving lives on the ground that would otherwise have been spent taking those heights by infantry alone. It remains one of the only wars in modern history where an air force operated almost entirely on one side of a border, fighting an enemy it could see, but was never allowed to fully pursue. And it did not so by learning, adapting and rebuilding its approach in real time under fire at the top of the world.